Welcome to Minority Focus. I'm your host, Jimmy Moore. I want to start by reiterating, for the benefit of those people who have said the show is too white bread or too brown bread or whatever bread. I inherited the show that was begun by Frank Brown. Started this show. And out of respect and regard for him, we've maintained the name that he gave it, Minority Focus. However, as far as I'm concerned, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit are the majority. Everything and everybody else is the minority. So the show hosts a variety of subjects about any number of matters. We did a show recently, I think it may be the last show airing, with John Poole, who is a private investigator from Mayfield, who stepped into a hornet's nest, if you will, of a case involving the murder of a Mayfield resident, Jessica Curran. Some of us remember the case, some may not have paid a lot of attention to it, but it's ongoing. And joining us today are two very special individuals in that they have like interest in the case, if you will. The father of Jessica Curran, Joe Curran, and the father of incarcerated for 8 years Quincy Cross, David Cross. So we have the father of the incarcerated and the father of the victim in the matter, along with John, who has returned with them for this show. Wasn't sure how to begin it or where to go in this show, because there is a ton of information, some of which I've been exposed to, much of which I haven't and probably never will be exposed to it. I'd like to thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank all of you for coming, and especially thank you and David, Joe, for joining us. I want to ask you, Joe, in the aftermath of your daughter's death, how long was it, would you say, before you knew something was amiss, other than the fact that Quincy had been incarcerated for the crime? Was it very long before you began to have thoughts as to the impropriety or things being amiss in the matter?
I began having some reservations about it from the very start, because the lead detective that was put on the case didn't have any experience, and he was telling me he did not know what he was doing. And that kind of raised some suspicion. And, you know, where you go from there, it's...
Straight up, the guy let it be known that he didn't know what he was doing.
Yes.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
Yes.
For an investigator of any sorts. Did he give you or not give you very much that would say anything in particular about what he'd found or hadn't found? Did he have any clues or anything you could go by to let you know?
Well, he was investigating the case, but he was telling my wife and I that he didn't have much experience. He felt like somebody was kind of sabotaging him on the case, going ahead of him before he'd get a chance to talk to people, and that he didn't have much experience and he really needed help.
Right.
And
I need to, excuse me, Joe, I need to stop right here and say that during this show, names may be named, people may be pointed out or whatever. Those people have every opportunity and are welcome to contact the station and set up a show for rebuttal, if you like. That's open to you. With that being said, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Did you want to continue with what you were saying?
Yes, this gentleman, Tim Faulkner, was put in charge of the case and had never had a case before that day. So this was his first case. And like I said, he did not feel like he knew what he was doing and that he needed help. And I had talked to the mayor about getting him some help. And that's kind of how we began.
I see. Well, David, I know for you, Dave, I ain't gonna get all proper on you now. Dave, I know for you and for the average parents to have your child tell you, Daddy, I didn't do it. That's enough for you. The average person can look in their child's eyes and tell if they're lying, you know. Anything in particular stand out as far as you're concerned? I know you got it right off the bat, of course, but anything in particular?
Well, when we begin to deal with facts in the case, then there was no comparison because facts showed that my son had nothing to do with it. The people that was arrested, they didn't even know each other at the time of this murder. So therefore, how can you commit a crime when the people that's involved don't even know each other? As a matter of fact, he'd never been to Mayfield before. So there's a whole lot that stands out that didn't add up in this case whenever we got to dealing with the facts.
See, they didn't know each other. Your son is in Mayfield. Crimes committed. Bunch of people verbally involve him in the crime, whatever. But he doesn't know these people.
No.
These people have never.
He'd never been to Mayfield before.
Is that right?
That night, it's the first time he ever been to Mayfield.
That particular night was the first time he'd ever been there.
We got to looking at the phone records and things, and I don't know why, but you know, the lawyers he had didn't even look at the phone records to find out where he was. You know, he could prove where he was at the time that the crime was supposed to be committed.
Right. So things are there that could clear a lot of matters up, or shed a different light on a lot of things.
You're exactly right.
But they were intentionally ignored?
That's the way I see it.
Intentionally?
Intentionally.
You, Jeff? You feel the same way?
Yes, I feel the same way.
Intentionally.
Come on, there's got to be something else going on here. We can't just have a bunch of people just purposely throwing away all this evidence and whatever because...
well,
they don't like it.
evidence from the crime scene disappeared before it got to the police station that was logged in. There's no physical evidence.
Right.
The people that got arrested, there's no physical evidence at all that they was nowhere near Mr. Cairns' daughter.
How long has your son been in prison?
7 years and something now.
He's been incarcerated almost 8 years?
Almost 8 years.
Would you say? And
Yeah.
things are still being checked out that may...
We filed brief after brief after brief, but the state of Kentucky seemed to ignore them. We filed facts after fact after fact.
Right. Excuse me. I've seen shows where someone is sent to prison for a crime and spend 20, 30 years or whatever in prison. And then new evidence or DNA evidence is introduced, completely freeing that person, exonerating them of the crime. It's absolute that they did not do the crime. And yet, the relatives of the person who was killed, whatever, murdered, still hold that vendetta. That person that they've seen go to prison is all they have as far as any kind of justice being done.
Right.
I think it's quite amazing that the two of you don't share that kind of feeling.
We're dealing with facts.
How long did it take for you all to meet on the fact that something was amiss about it? about this?
Well, like I said, I knew from the beginning that a whole lot wasn't right in this case, and I was involved in it from day one.
Right.
So we met, I guess it was been about a year ago now, and like I said, he checked the facts out too, and I mean, there's no comparison.
How'd that come about, Joe, that you all finally had that meeting? You recall?
Probably through John Poole, through talking and coordinating with him. He had been working on some stuff, investigating and checking out things. And when we began to talk, we began to find out that he had some reservations the same area that I did, and he was seeing some of the same things that I saw, how there was lots of evidence that was not used. There were witnesses that were not interviewed, and there was evidence that was lost that could take the case in a totally different direction.
Right.
And that's pretty obvious when you really begin to look through it. I didn't look through the paperwork in the case from the beginning. I was trying to let first the Mayfield Police
Right.
and the Sheriff's Department and the State Police second, when they got a hold to it, give them time to do their job, and eventually the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation ended up taking it over, the KBI,
Right.
from the Attorney General's office.
Mm-hmm.
And through all this, I still don't feel like everything was used. I still don't feel like all the truth came out, and I don't feel like that we ended up going where the evidence lead.
I'll say I can imagine. I can't, but I can almost imagine what that very first meeting or conversation might have been like between the two of you. It seems that both of you had come to that resolve.
Yes.
That something is amiss,
Yes.
if nothing else. Something is not quite right here. And you've compared notes, and you've compared writings, and you've compared
Evidence
a lot of
and
things.
facts.
Facts that keep you both on the same.
Well,
Right.
he told me some stuff that I didn't know that he had been checking out.
Right.
And then I told him some stuff that he didn't
Right.
know that I had been checking out. And John Poole told us both some stuff that none of us had looked at.
Right.
And when you start putting all of those ends together, they don't always necessarily meet. So it made us begin to believe what we had already begun to believe, that this wasn't correct.
Small town. A lot of he said, she said, they said. Any number of people can get involved in something that they ain't got no business being involved in, just by opening their mouths. Did you run into a lot of that? As far as talking to, say, Jessica's friends, or people that knew her, did you find a lot of that? People who really weren't about it, that had opinions to make?
Well, a lot of people wanted to do whatever they thought would help in the case, or what they thought would be some kind of remorse or some condolences. Maybe they can say, well, she was a good friend, or I knew her, or you know, they're just trying to relieve the family a little bit, some kind of way. And I understand that that's a natural thing to happen. And when a case like this happens, but she didn't know. The majority of the people involved in this case, she really didn't know them.
Right. I know there are so many avenues to go down when you're trying to find the truth about a matter that involves the system, if you will. I know that, and prior to some of the things that you're doing now, there were other areas that the both of you went into, as far as the political circus. I know that you've had things to do in both Mayfield and Louisville and Frankfort, with no results, with no positive results.
That's correct. We had our first march at Mayfield Courthouse trying to get some attention that the case was being stalled and that the evidence wasn't being used, and it was just kind of sitting dormant at one point. Then we had a march at Mitch McConnell's office here in Paducah. And I think we had 2 of those, 2 different times. And he never recognized or did anything because we didn't ever hear anything out of him or his office about that.
Right.
I think Alton McDonald might have gotten a letter saying that they were going to do something, but I don't think anything was ever done. Right. We also did a march at the Capitol in Frankfort and talked to the Attorney General there.
Right.
And we did one at Louisville, at the FBI office in Louisville. Mm-hmm. And we also did one at the U.S. Attorney's office.
Right. And just recently, a rally in Mayfield.
Right.
What was that like, Dave? How the rally go?
It went real well. It went real well. We filled up the parking lots and kind of had a little picnic afterward. It was a positive step.
Right. What was representation like there? Is it mostly, is Paducah into this, as aware of this, as involved about this, as folks in Mayfield? The surrounding area, the smaller cities around us that we're composed of down here in Western Kentucky. Are people noticing, paying attention? Have they paid attention to what's happened, to what's happening outside of Mayfield?
Well, I don't think that a lot of them have really heard about what's going on, know the details of what's going on. I believe they will once they hear the facts about the case. Well, that's what we're trying to do now with our petitions,
Right.
to draw some awareness to an injustice that's going on.
I started way back. I was still working at the fire department at Mayfield, where I retired from. I went to the NAACP meeting at Mayfield, and not to get help, but to make an announcement that I'm going to Frankfort,
Right.
and that if they wanted to be involved, so be it. But if they don't get involved, I'm still going. And they did not really get involved, but they did talk to the mayor and the police chief about what happened in the case when the first case had been thrown out, where Jeremy Adams and Lolo Saxton, Carlos Saxton, and Venetia Stubblefield. The case that was thrown out because of not turning evidence over to the other side, to the prosecutors, right. To the defense team, mm-hmm. The discovery. And that's when that case was thrown out. That's when I began to do some things to try to get this thing going. Also, I had went to a meeting that they had in Paducah at NAACP meeting and announced to them also the same, that I was going to go do this. I got some support, but it was not a whole lot of support, but I did stay in contact with some people here in Paducah for a little while on that. Okay. But it kind of, as time went on, it kind of died down and kind of got quiet. And most of these people, I do believe, thought that what they did do was going to help, and that police would go to work and do their job. Right. And that didn't happen.
I understand.
Jimmy, if I could just add one thing. This has gone on for 13 years, and since the petitions have been circulated, people have said to me, you know, why is this still going on? And I think part of that, people have lost interest, and so that makes it harder to get attention now, although I believe we had a good turnout at that park. We've got several hundred signatures now, and all the Currans and Cross and our family, as you know, I got involved with this because my nephew is still incarcerated, because he was one of them that took an Alfred plea, and so we do believe that the petition process hopefully will bring attention to this, because, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's so tragic that his daughter was taken from him, but it's even more tragic that the answers really, the truth hasn't been given to that family. And then probably even most importantly, and I think we talked about a little bit when I was on your show the last time, we need to maintain the integrity of our legal system. And there's 3 ladies that were the state's witnesses in this case. That was, the whole case basically was put together by those 3, have now said, when they were interviewed by the Kentucky Innocence Project investigator and attorney, that they were forced to lie by the police authorities. And so that was the state's case, and what we're asking for is that to be investigated. Were they forced to lie? And if they were, then this needs to be looked at to see who actually did this crime. They have got to know a lot more about this, and a lot of people aren't familiar with how the law enforcement system works, but when you're accused of a crime, then ultimately you get the discovery. That means all the evidence that the state has against you. Mr. Curran has told me that he had never seen the state's case. And so we've got together over the years, and he's looked at it, Mr. Cross has looked at it, others have looked at it. I've even had independent law enforcement look at it. It has nothing to do with this area. And one thing that we know for sure, and the one thing that they teach you in the basic investigation class, is that the crime scene is what it is. It can't change. And if you look at the testimony of those women, it doesn't in any way match up with a crime scene.
Right.
So that, in a nutshell, is what we're asking for, is this to be looked at by the federal authorities, and we're hoping through the petition process that that's what happens.
I want to ask you this, David. Dave, Quincy is incarcerated, has been incarcerated for almost 8 years at, can I ask this? Can I say this? Can I say where he is? Is that?
Oh, he's at Burgess.
Yeah, no, you can say
Tennessee.
that. It's a state facility.
Yeah.
From what I've understood, what I understood from one conversation with you, that is far away.
Well, it's not as far as where he was before. He was up at way up near Virginia state line the last time, and they closed it down, so they brought him at Burgess, Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
I mean Kentucky.
Right.
Right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, right now.
Okay. Because I was wondering how
He's a little
unusual it
closer
was
right now.
to be put that far, away from
Yeah,
contact, with your
right.
with your kin. From our conversations and from things that I've been given to read, that I've read about, factual type things. You mentioned earlier, John, the crime scene. I found it in my. I'm a novice at this. I don't know anything about investigating and all this kind of thing. But it seemed unusual that people were allowed to be on that crime scene that has no business there. No legal, lawful, anything that allowed them to be there. You also mentioned that, and I've read that evidence in the case was lost before even reaching any place where it was supposed
The evidence
to be investigated
room,
and what have you.
apparently.
Yes.
In an investigation of this sort, how possibly could that happen? How have things happened that are so wrong in this particular case? It seemed the norm about law enforcement investigating and all of that sort of thing. How in the world have things like this happened?
Well, that's a good question because first of all, it brings back to this has gone on for 13 years, and a lot of different people have been involved in so-called investigating it. And one of the persons that was busy investigating it was a private citizen, and that person had all the discovery because she had some connection with Jeremy Adams' family. So she was able to look at the state's case and then go out with law enforcement and do interviews. And
Jeremy Adams is
Jeremy Adams is the person, one of the persons first charged with Jessica's murder. And as Mr. Curran pointed out, that case was dismissed because the prosecution didn't turn over evidence to the defense team in a timely manner. However, that case was dismissed without prejudice. And what that means is at any time, the prosecutors could have brought that case back up against Adams. But for a variety of reasons, the focus changed from Adams and Lolo Saxton, who was her boyfriend at that time.
Is it a variety of reasons that you don't care to share?
Well, part of it's what we were talking about. There was a person in here that, and I guess they're going through with it, that wants to write a movie. There were people that wanted the reward money. There was all kinds of things going on, and in conjunction with that, like Mr. Curran said, the first officer had no experience at all. Evidence was lost, and then ultimately this was turned over to the state police. And then that investigator was ultimately terminated as he was moving along with that case. But that investigator, you can look at the record, was working closely with the person that's trying to get the reward and trying to develop a movie with the person that produces movies. So then that one's out of the picture, and a new state police investigator takes charge. And the record indicates that that investigator was not as close with a private citizen as the previous one. And then it winds up with a newly created Kentucky Bureau of Investigation, which has since been changed to some type of criminal investigation division. And they had KBI agents investigate it. So you've got this whole myriad of people being involved, plus the rumor mill going around, so that's made it very hard to find out the actual facts.
So KBI is Kentucky Bureau
of Investigation.
They sent, they involved 2 seasoned professional or more people to come down and investigate the case, but didn't get done?
No, as it turns out, and we have today with us the transcript from the cross trial. One of the agents testified at the cross trial that he had never investigated a murder before in his life. And the other one, I believe, also had made that statement. They primarily, that office function, one of them's background was welfare fraud investigation, and the other person had retired from the Louisville Police Department, and his job was a narcotics investigator.
One would think that a case of this sort, weren't there murder investigators? There were no people that were knowledgeable of how to do this thing. Two KBI people came that didn't know how to do it, that had no experience in it?
Well, they supposedly were working in conjunction with the state police, and certainly the KBI investigating the murder, from which I looked at their past record, would be out of their normal thing, because they're usually looking at political corruption, welfare fraud, those type of things. But they got involved and allegedly worked with the state police. But if you read the records, there was a lot of conflict between the KBI and the state police on who was running the show right there, because in law enforcement, in any major crime, you always have to have a lead agency, and that agency makes the decisions and the others do the investigating, and it all comes back in. Where you had there, and there's a case of Jeremy Adams where they were interviewing him because he was incarcerated on another charge, that the state police go up a few days after the KBI agents had already been there. So one hand didn't really know what the other was doing. Right. And that's part of how we've got the problem today.
Dave, Joe, when did you all become aware that these people didn't have any experience doing what they were doing and trying to solve your daughter's murder, and you're...
Well, we knew that from the start.
From the start, you both knew
yeah.
that these people didn't have any experience
We
in
knew
that
that from
in
the
area?
start because of the way that our people was charged. I mean, the indictments was all made up, messed up.
Right.
You
Right.
know, the evidence was hearsay. You know, no facts.
Is that still the case? We're talking
All the
about-
witnesses was telling too many different stories.
Right. Have those stories changed? Any
Yeah.
of those people who've
As
told
he, as,
stories,
as
have
he
they
said, the main players has retracted their stories.
Well, if trying to understand, if the main players aren't the perpetrators, had nothing to do with the
Well, I'm sorry to jump in,
No, go
Jimmy,
ahead,
but all three of the players were involved in this at one time. Two of them now are used to claim that they were there when Jessica was killed, and the other one claims that she had a relationship with my nephew and he told her things.
Jeffrey Burton.
Yeah, Jeffrey Burton. So that's how that goes. And the other two were charged with serious crimes, but they took plea deals. One, as far as we can find, served hardly any time in jail, and the other served a rather short time.
One was placed in the witness protection program during this whole ordeal.
Right. Witness protection program. That's to keep. Normally, it's to keep. If you're gonna testify against somebody, and somebody might kill you to stop you from testifying, they'll put you in witness protection. Or if you have some involvement like that, who were the people that were going to harm?
Well, we never could figure that out since my son was in prison.
I beg your pardon,
My son has been in prison for almost 8 years. So
but he was supposed to have been a threat to this person.
to this day, we still don't understand that.
Right. Joe, of all the people involved that you know of, was there anybody close enough that knew enough to help, to keep any of this from getting to where it is now? All those people that may have known what actually happened. Nobody said anything? Nobody's come forward? Nobody's...
Well, I had talked to the prosecutor and the mayor at the time, and would talking to Tim Fortner. If I want to get a tooth pulled, I don't go to Burger King. I go to a dentist.
Right.
If they don't have the people that can do this case, they need to get someone that's experienced to do the case. You don't bring in a whole herd of people that has no clue. As my buddy says, he can work on a dozer, but he can't fix it.
Right. I understand
If you
what you're
can't fix it, then we don't really need it.
saying. Exactly.
And a lot of the mistakes that was made in this case, we were being told at the beginning they were just mistakes because they were unexperienced.
Right.
Of course, they just explained that they were unexperienced. But when I look back on this case now, I understand that a 10-year-old would know not to make these mistakes. These mistakes were made on purpose. It had to be a reason to do this, because most of the mistakes that were made were very, very obvious and very, very detrimental to the case.
Well, usually when decisions are made up here about things that people do down here, and the
Yes.
people up there make the finale or the final decisions about it,
Yes.
then something is the matter somewhere. If these people don't get information correctly or properly from these people, then it's never going to be
Correct.
solved. Ground floor determines how high a thing goes. Ground floor in this case being Mayfield.
To start with.
To start with. It's some improprieties, it seems. Can you talk about what those improprieties are?
Well, I can, the one, there was a clump of hair that was photographed that would have probably been crucial evidence that it had the evidence number and so forth, it never made it to the police department, or if it did, somehow it magically went away from there. There was a number of things like that, like Joe says, you could be a 10-year-old. A lot of this we talk about the training, in which that is very important that you have the training. But any of this, if you just look at it just with some common sense and reasonableness, it's wrong. And so whatever, you couldn't, I think we talked about it before, you couldn't have made this up if you were trying to make a script like this lady and man are doing to make this so-called movie that's supposed to come out. And it's unbelievable how all this has transpired. And with nobody stopping it somewhere and saying, this is wrong, we need to go back and start over again.
From the crime scene to the police station, evidence is lost.
Yes.
It never appears, never makes it to where it needs to be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And supposedly the state police camera malfunctioned, so we don't know about those pictures. And also one of the crucial things, when you have the perimeter set up around a crime scene, it's very important to really minimize the amount of people that are in there, and it can't just be the looky-loo cops or anyone else. You've got to really maintain that scene. And one of the people that have been involved in supposedly trying to solve this, and now is into the movie business, the roster that they keep that lists everybody that goes on to the crime scene, her name is one of the big ones on there. And a question in my mind, and I think theirs, is why was a citizen that was a friend of one of the first accused, at least the mother, and if not the one accused, why is she allowed in a crime scene? And then she goes about to investigate the murder. And then she's armed with the discovery, which she would know when she's out interviewing people, what the actual evidence, and other people wouldn't know that.
So if I had approached you as a private investigator, me, an ordinary citizen,
Yes.
you would not have given me information about anything that's gone on. Am I privy to that?
Well,
in the legal aspect.
If say, Mr. Curran hires me as a private investigator, everything that I investigate is given to him. Now, if he chooses or he tells me to tell you, then I can do that.
No, I mean, you're a crime scene investigator.
Okay.
You're on the scene to investigate the crime.
As a police
And
officer.
I'm a private citizen, and I don't think enough's been done, so I'm going to do my own investigation into this case. And I come to you in whatever capacity you're in the legal system. You're going to give me everything you got to help me prove this case?
No.
Can't you give me anything?
Well, people can be useful, but you've got, as an investigator, you have to keep them back, because you talk to all sorts of people that have different motives, but you never make them like a co-investigator in the case. You always keep them back so they don't get intertwined, because if they've got an agenda, they could bias the interviews that they set up. This one lady was setting up interviews with the police and going along on the interviews.
I was told in the case not to do my own separate interviews and my own separate investigation. Let the police do their job. Of course, I didn't have a lot of choice. It started with the city police of Mayfield, who are working for the city of Mayfield. I'm a firefighter at that time. I'm working for the city of Mayfield. And it could get to be a tangled mess if I start doing that, and I'm also part of the city. But by not looking at it, now when I do have a chance to look at it, because I've gotten several pages of this and tapes and stuff from Mr. Poole and others about this case, when I look at it now, and I told the prosecutor this at the time before all of this come up, that at this point, it looked like the people that need to be arrested is the police officers that's doing it. Because there were things that were thrown away, lost, just wasn't used, people that wasn't interviewed, We talked to several people that knew something that was never talked to at all.
Right.
I don't think it's how you solve a case. I think it's how you don't solve a case.
Exactly. If I'm going to investigate you, Dave, private citizens, you've done something in the legal system, and I'm going to investigate you for it. I can literally, with the information I gather, outside of the legal system, outside of law enforcement, I can, in some way, have you put in prison on the basis of what and I got no legal in this at all. What can I do? Is that what's happened? Someone who has no ties, no ends.
Well, it's just
with the
like
legal
you
system.
said, it's a lot of evidence, like the hair that was found on Jessica's shoe. It was checked. The DNA was tested between the people that was arrested, but it wasn't tested by the people that she was around that night. I mean, just little things like that. That hair sample could have told who she was around that night.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't match Quincy, it didn't match nobody that they charged, but they wasn't willing to even test it to find out.
Can ordinary citizens solve a crime and put it through the...
It's kind of a tightrope you walk, because there's also a violation called hindering investigation. Most states have that, or something to that wording. But you certainly have a right to look at what's going on. But the investigating officer, at least in my 30-plus years of experience, has to keep that person back. They can be a conduit for information, but you don't do a joint investigation with a citizen. You don't even know their agenda or what they're doing. For a variety of reasons, you keep that separated.
Right. I've heard, I think I hear, all of you saying that in some form or fashion, Mayfield Police Department is responsible directly for much that has happened or hasn't happened.
Right.
There's no part of the legal system there that you can go to now that would help you in any form or fashion?
No, it's going to have to go, and I'll let them answer too, that we've exhausted that. We've tried to even with the Kentucky Innocence Project, they were looking into this on my nephew's behalf, and actually on Mr. Cross's son's behalf. But we have and maybe I haven't researched, but it seems unique to me that the Kentucky Innocence Project is under the Kentucky Cabinet of Criminal Justice. So you have the state police, you have the corrections, you have the public advocate's office, and you have the Kentucky Innocence Project, all under one department head. And so how do you get an unbiased viewpoint? Because they were investigating and they found a number of problems and they were going to go forward, but all of a sudden, and the funding ran out, but they were shifted to other things. I believe and that was an attorney and a private investigator, a public defender investigator, who signed the affidavit that interviewed all the 3 women that were involved, that said that they lied.
You said there's a tier here,
Yes.
and all of these agencies that could help, would help, are under the umbrella of this
The Criminal
one
Justice
agency.
Cabinet.
So what's the problem?
Well, if it was me, I would want some separation, just because you want to have it unbiased. And if you've got a department head that's responsible for all these departments, there could be a conflict.
If someone at that level is and somehow affiliated with something along the line down here, you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Well, if you go on the internet and you look at that cabinet, which is an interesting thing, that one of the chief investigators for the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation was Mr. Wise. And it's interesting that his wife is the general counsel of the Criminal Justice Cabinet. Now, that might not be any conflict of all, but it just seems like that they would step aside and let somebody independently look at it. I mean, it's just inherently built in. Even if there's nothing wrong, it's the perception that your wife is the general counsel, and somebody's accusing you of forcing people to lie.
Dave, 8 years, almost 8 years.
You're right.
Quincy's been incarcerated. I can't imagine.
And
The
his sentence is 3 life sentences without possibility of parole.
He has 3 life sentences. How do you get 3? I don't understand that. He didn't do anything to 3 people, did he?
Well, Mr. Poole will explain that to
Well,
you.
it's for each crime you're charged with, because he's charged with rape and he's charged.
There's no evidence of rape, but he still got.
Yeah, I read something earlier that you had, John, that
Right.
showed all that there isn't
Yeah.
Yeah.
or wasn't,
Wasn't,
as
right.
far as things that are used to prosecute people and determine them guilty of. That'd been pretty rough on you, Dave. 8 years dealing, working. You had to put on your investigative shoes and hat.
Well, you 100% correct. But look at here, the good Lord works in mysterious ways, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is somewhat miraculous. I don't think I've ever seen this before.
The,
For parties
the good
on,
Lord brought good people into the circle.
All 3 of you, no doubt. And it takes more than, far more than any one of you to bring about anything positive.
It's going to be very hard to get something done about this, because as we talked about before, the justice system, it's easy to get yourself put in it, but it's very hard to get out. That's why some people ask me, well, why would anybody plead guilty to something they didn't do? That goes on all the time. And if you put yourself in those shoes and you go through the process and you don't have money to pay for an attorney, or you pay for an attorney that doesn't handle it properly, they wear you down. In the National Innocence Project has exonerated over 300 people since their existence started several years ago. And many of those people pled guilty. So it's not an unusual thing for someone to plead guilty. The one fair trial, I believe, that was ever handled right on this case was another defendant that was adequately represented by an attorney and an investigator. And the jury, within a couple of hours, found that the state's case had no merit and found him innocent. And basically that was the same facts of the case that was used in the Cross trial.
Right.
So in his son's trial, in my opinion, you had a public advocate that, and it's even on the court record, that the judge asked him if he's well enough to continue on. He appeared to have medical problems. He didn't do the job that I've seen other attorneys do. There's many things that, in my opinion, certainly I'm not a lawyer, but being in that for 30-something years, you've seen a lot of trials. He could have represented his son much better. He's since deceased now, so we have no one to talk to see what was going on with him.
I understand.
Well, in my opinion on this case, there was a failure. You know, a while ago when you talked about the brackets, you know, it started with the Mayfield police. They made lots of mistakes. They lost evidence. They got rid of evidence. They didn't interview people. And they put people on the case that didn't have experience. Was that done on purpose? Or did they really understand what they were doing? I say it was done on purpose. And you can ask some of the people involved in the case and they'll tell you the same. Then they moved it up to the state police, who I heard did not even want the case to begin with. When they got the case, it was almost like they were forced to do it. Then they had to go ahead on and take care of the case. The one that got probably done the most on the case lost his job. And then somebody else takes over the case, and they didn't get the case done. Each agency had about 3 years on the case. Then enters the KBI, the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation. And in my opinion, state police did not do their job. Mayfield police did not do their job. And when it got to the KBI, they did not do their job. Now, all 3 of these agencies from the bottom up has had their opportunity. And as far as I'm concerned, with the mistakes that were made from the Mayfield police and not being fixed or made better by the state police, and the KBI coming in and not making it any better and filling all these loopholes, I feel like all three agencies have failed. And I feel like that not only was my daughter's human rights, her civil rights, and a lot of other people who are involved in this rights have been violated because of them not doing their job and not doing their job correctly. It's very possibly the wrong people are in jail. It's very possible that the people that did this is still on the street. And there's a lot of police officers and people that should have been arrested for what they done, and even all the way to the medical examiner's office, because there were things done that shouldn't have been done there, and it all needs to be checked out. And we don't want anyone here to check out the people here. It needs to be an investigative group, a whole group of people from either Washington, D.C. or somewhere else that come in and look at this as it is and not work with anyone here on this case. They come and do it, and it'll be done right.
It's my understanding that the political arena has played or is playing a significant role in some of this. Is that fact or fiction?
Well, there are people that just really don't want to get their hands dirty in this, but you can't continue to hold off to keep your hands clean. Right. At some point, you have to get your hands in the soup if you want it to come out right, and they got to get their hands in this, because if everybody keeps holding back, it'll never be done right, and justice is not in any point of this been served.
Are we talking people who are in positions of power politically that could, would, or are preventing this case from being solved? What do you think, Dave?
Well, you said a mouthful there. I believe that's what's going on.
Really?
I actually believe that's what's going on. Look at the autopsy report. Quincy went to trial. Nobody never said anything about her being stabbed. Yeah, but the first autopsy report revealed that she was stabbed. Yeah. You know.
So we're down now to what? An investigator of some type. Well, that kind of information wouldn't be noted.
They wouldn't have bought the story that was told by different people, because what happened to the stab wound? There's one of the defendants in that, she mentions her being stabbed, but other than that, there's no mention of that. Also, that medical examiner was ultimately terminated from employment with the state of Kentucky. He didn't do a toxology test, which is just the basic things. So maybe somebody drugged her. Why would you not do a toxology test? The maggots that were there are used where you can tell how long the body was there, because there's a whole investigative tool you can use. Those were thrown away. Her dress was thrown away. And it's really interesting in that dress, because the state's witnesses have over and over said that she had no clothing on when she died, and magically, the crime scene, she has clothes.
There was a lot of inconsistencies about the autopsy.
Okay, we've got police are there. The coroner has come, and that's two blows. Two people have blown this thing, if you will. I listened to something, read something earlier that said we're not only talking about Mayfield in itself. You've mentioned that all of these organizations that are under the umbrella of a certain organization. If I dare ask, and you dare answer, what is the highest level in the political arena that has had part in this or is having part in this?
Well, and I know Mr. Curran has, and he mentioned, I've notified the federal authorities. He's notified the federal authorities. I've sent a letter to the governor several years ago. We have went to everybody that we could get to let us talk. And so far as on the state level, or the local level, even with the federal people involved, there's nothing else that we can do. They need to bring somebody in that has no allegiance to this at all and just independently look at it. If there's nothing wrong, then it solves it forever. But I would really be surprised that that would be their results, that they find nothing wrong with this.
Well, like you just said, John, to get them to come in and look at this, what's stopping them?
Well, see,
What's the holdup?
The highest law enforcement officer for the state of Kentucky is the Attorney General. And we worked through the Attorney General. I talked to 3 Attorney Generals. And I started with the one before Greg Stumbo and Conway, and I worked with all 3 of these Attorney Generals trying to get something done. And we finally got something out of Greg Stumbo, and supposedly we were supposed to get the finish out of Conway. And that's when the KBI finally did show up, and they really didn't get to the bottom of this.
Of course, the next steps, Conway, then Stumbo, or Stumbo, then Conway?
Well, it was the one before that, and I can't think of his name right now, but we had a gentleman before that, and then we had Greg Stumbo, and then Jack Conway. Right. But the problem with this case is that my daughter wasn't just killed. This is an execution. When you find a body that have been strangled, beaten, stabbed, and burned, that's more than a murder. One of these could have killed her. Right. Why did they do 4? This is an execution. This is a human rights violation, a civil rights violation. This is big. This should have an arena of its own. This should have went all the way to the top from the very start. Nobody on this local level should have investigated this with all the things that happened with this.
There's a world of information that we've not been able to touch base with on this show. No doubt, in the very near future, there will be another. I've asked the directors and the producers of the show, not the producers, the directors, if we can stay with this. Maybe not to the end, but long enough to develop, hopefully, more interest in this that would be beneficial to what all of you hope to accomplish in what you're doing. And I know you'll come back, won't you?
Yeah, we'll be
know
back.
things much about it, right?
We'll be back.
Of course.
I hope so. We'll be talking to you. We'll be getting together quite often about this matter. I hope you'll stay tuned for the upcoming shows about Jessica's murder and Quincy's incarceration. Both parents have lost children, if you will. And we want to open it up to get as much information as possible that we can out there to you. Keep watching. For Minority Focus, I'm Jimmy Moore.